There is a moment most people misunderstand. They think peace arrives when problems disappear, when life becomes easier, when the mind finally gets what it wants. But the human mind does not calm down because it is satisfied. It calms down when it feels safe. And safety does not come from comfort. It comes from predictability. A restless mind is not searching for pleasure. It is searching for structure. This is why people can sit in silence, yet feel noisy inside, because the brain is not reacting to the present moment. It is reacting to the absence of internal order. Psychology shows something uncomfortable here. When the mind lacks internal rules, it starts scanning the environment continuously, not for opportunity, but for threat. That threat might not be real, but uncertainty feels like danger to the nervous system. So the brain stays alert, hyper-aware, never resting. This is not anxiety in the clinical sense. This is directionless alertness. The brain asking again and again, what am I supposed to do next? Where am I heading? What matters right now? When it cannot answer, keeps you awake, not physically, mentally. True calm does not begin with relaxation techniques. It begins when the mind learns something powerful. I know what comes next, even if what comes next is simple, even if it is boring. The nervous system relaxes when sequence returns. That is why disciplined people appear calm, not because they are strong, but because their mind is not negotiating every hour. Indecision is exhausting. Every small choice drains energy when no internal hierarchy exists. What to do, what to ignore, what deserves attention, what does not. Without hierarchy, everything feels equally urgent. And when everything feels urgent, nothing feels meaningful. So the mind keeps moving, scrolling, thinking, replaying, planning imaginary futures, not because it wants to, but because it doesn't know where to rest. Neuroscience calls this cognitive drift. When attention has no anchor, it floats until it burns. The cure is not forcing focus. Forcing focus actually increases restlessness, because pressure tells the brain something is wrong. Instead, calm begins when you reduce internal arguments, not external distractions, internal ones. The argument between who you are now and who you think you should be. That conflict creates constant friction. The mind cannot settle while judging itself. So restoration begins subtly, not with discipline as punishment, but discipline as reassurance. A small, predictable routine, the same action at the same time, not for productivity, for nervous system regulation. When repetition enters, the brain stops asking questions. And when questions stop, energy returns. This is why routines heal people before they motivate them. The mind relaxes when it no longer has to decide its identity every morning. I wake up, I do this, then this. That certainty lowers cortisol. That lowers internal noise. That creates silence naturally. Over time, the brain relearns trust. Trust in your word. Trust in sequence. Trust in direction. And something strange happens. You stop chasing calm, because calm begins following you, not as emotion, but as stability. Thoughts still appear, but they no longer pull you. Emotions still arise, but they no longer control timing. You start responding instead of reacting, not because you are trying harder, but because your system is no longer overloaded. This is how control actually returns, quietly, without force, without extremes, not by suppressing desire, but by giving the mind a place to stand. Structure does not cage the mind. It gives it a floor, and once the mind has a floor, it no longer falls into restlessness. What most people don't realize is this: restlessness is not chaos. It is unspent authority. The mind becomes restless when it has power but no command. Energy without direction does not become motivation. It becomes irritation. That's why people feel tense even on days when nothing goes wrong. The system is active, but no one is giving it orders, so it turns inward. Overthinking is not weakness. It is leadership without structure. The brain keeps producing thoughts because it was designed to serve something. When it cannot serve a clear direction, it starts serving fear. This is where many people make a fatal mistake. They try to silence the mind, but the mind was never meant to be silenced. It was meant to be guided. Psychology shows that the brain relaxes not when activity stops, but when activity becomes purpose-bound. A restless mind is asking one question again and again: who is in charge here? When no clear internal authority exists, the emotional brain takes over. Impulse starts deciding timing. Mood starts deciding behavior. Comfort starts deciding identity. And slowly the rational mind steps back, not because it disappeared, but because chaos replaced command. Rebuilding calm requires reclaiming authorship, not control over thoughts, control over response. This is subtle. You don't command the mind by shouting at it. You command it by moving first. Action precedes belief. The brain does not wait for motivation. It watches behavior. Every small completed action sends one silent signal upward. He means what he starts. And when the brain senses reliability, it begins cooperating. This is how authority returns internally, not through intensity, through consistency. That is why extremes fail. Extreme discipline scares the nervous system. Extreme comfort weakens it, but quiet structure stabilizes it. The mind relaxes when it knows, you will not abandon me halfway. That trust reduces inner noise more than meditation ever could, because meditation calms the mind temporarily. Reliability calms it permanently. Over time, something deeper shifts. Your thoughts slow down not because you force silence, but because fewer thoughts are required. The brain no longer needs to remind you of everything. It no longer needs to create urgency, because your life now responds. This is where presence appears, not as spirituality, as efficiency. You become grounded because your internal system is no longer leaking energy. And once energy stops leaking, clarity rises automatically, not as inspiration, as steadiness. You start noticing something important. You are not in a hurry anymore. Urgency fades, and urgency is the root of restlessness. When the mind stops rushing the future, the present becomes breathable. Even discomfort becomes manageable. because discomfort with direction feels meaningful. Discomfort without direction feels unbearable. This is the difference most people never learn. A disciplined mind does not suffer less. It understands why it is enduring, and meaning stabilizes pain. This is why calm people aren't emotionless. They simply know what they're carrying and why. That knowing quiets internal rebellion. The mind stops resisting life when life starts making sense, not philosophically, practically, day by day, action by action, promise by promise kept. This is the psychology of real calm, not absence of struggle, presence of order. At a certain stage, calm stops being a technique. It becomes an identity shift. This is where most people get confused. They keep trying to do calm, instead of becoming someone whose system naturally settles. Because the mind does not obey habits alone. It obeys identity alignment. When your self-image changes, behavior follows without resistance. This is why forcing routines fails. The subconscious asks one silent question before every action. Is this who I am? If the answer is unclear, the system hesitates. Hesitation creates friction. Friction creates mental noise. Noise creates fatigue. So the real work is not discipline. It is identity clarification. A restless mind often belongs to someone who hasn't decided who they are yet. Not socially, internally. When the identity is unstable, the brain keeps scanning. Should I push? Should I relax? Should I escape? Should I prove? These conflicting commands fight each other. That inner conflict is felt as anxiety, not fear conflict. Once identity becomes clear, half the thoughts disappear because they are no longer needed. You stop negotiating with yourself, and negotiation is exhausting. Powerful calm comes from decisiveness, not certainty. Certainty belongs to outcomes. Decisiveness belongs to direction. The brain relaxes when direction is chosen, even if the outcome is unknown. That's why people feel calmer walking into something difficult they chose, than staying stuck in comfort they didn't choose. Choice creates coherence, and coherence creates peace. This is neuroscience, not motivation. When neural circuits point in one direction, energy flows smoothly. When they point in opposite directions, energy collides. Collision feels like restlessness. Alignment feels like calm. This is also why overthinking reduces once identity stabilizes. Because overthinking is the brain searching for alignment. When alignment exists, search stops. Another deep truth appears here. The mind becomes quiet not when answers are found, but when questions stop repeating. Repetition is pain. Resolution is relief. But resolution doesn't mean knowing everything. It means accepting one guiding principle. Personal code, not rules. The code. Rules demand obedience. Codes create self-respect. And self-respect regulates behavior more strongly than willpower. This is why people with strong internal values appear disciplined effortlessly. They are not resisting temptation. They are uninterested in contradiction. Temptation only works when identity is negotiable. When identity is solid, temptation loses its grip. Not because desire disappears, but because desire no longer outranks direction. Direction outranks impulse. That hierarchy changes everything. The emotional brain stops hijacking control. Once it understands it is not the leader, it still speaks, but it no longer commands. And when emotions lose command, they lose chaos. They become information instead of instructions. This is emotional maturity at its deepest level. Not suppression, not expression, integration. You feel emotion fully, but you don't move until meaning approves. That pause is power. That pause is calm. That pause is what separates the restless mind from the centered one. Most people never build that pause. They live reaction to reaction, and reactions keep the nervous system permanently alert. Alert systems cannot rest. Only governed systems can. Once governance returns internally, something profound happens. Silence appears between thoughts. Not empty silence, stable silence. The kind that feels grounded, not blank. This silence is not peace from escape. It is peace from structure, and structure allows life to flow without panic. This is where inner strength becomes visible, not loud, not dramatic, but undeniable. People feel it around you because regulated systems transmit safety. Unregulated systems transmit urgency, and urgency repels trust. Calm attracts it, without effort, without performance, just presence. At the deepest level, calm is no longer something you practice. It becomes something others feel around you. This is where inner order turns into presence. Presence is not confidence. Confidence can fluctuate. Presence does not. Presence comes from a nervous system that is no longer fighting itself. When internal conflict ends, energy stops leaking. And when energy stops leaking, it concentrates. That concentration is what people interpret as strength. Not dominance, not aggression, stability. The human brain is wired to sense stability instinctively. Long before words, long before logic, a regulated system recognizes another regulated system. This is why calm people are listened to more, not because they speak louder, but because their tone carries certainty without urgency. Urgency is always a signal of fear. Calm is a signal of command. When the mind is no longer restless, it stops trying to prove. And when proving stops, power appears. Because power does not ask to be seen. It is sensed. This is why true authority is quiet. It does not compete for attention. It does not rush to explain. It does not fear silence. Silence becomes comfortable because silence no longer exposes disorder. It reflects order. At this stage, emotional regulation becomes automatic. Not forced, automatic. The nervous system has learned rhythm, like a heartbeat that no longer needs conscious control. Triggers still exist, but they no longer hijack direction. Thoughts still appear, but they no longer multiply. The mind now understands its role. It serves. It does not lead. Leadership belongs to values, to direction, to the internal code that was built layer by layer. This is where peace becomes durable, not fragile, not mood-based, durable, because it is rooted in identity, not circumstance. Life can shake, but the core holds. The world can become loud, but the inner system stays ordered. This is the difference between temporary calm and inner sovereignty. Temporary calm depends on environment. Inner sovereignty depends on alignment. Once alignment exists, the mind stops searching. Searching is what exhausts humans. Not work, not effort. Searching. When the search ends, rest begins even during action. You can move fast without inner chaos. You can face pressure without panic. You can stand in uncertainty without collapse. Because something inside you is settled. Not because everything is resolved, but because command has returned. The mind knows who leads, and leadership creates peace, not happiness. Peace. Happiness comes and goes. Peace stays. This is the restoration restlessness could never offer. Not escape, not numbness, but internal order that cannot be taken away. And once this order exists, you no longer chase calm. Calm becomes the space you move from. There was never anything wrong with your mind. It was never broken. It was never weak. It was simply waiting for direction. Restlessness was not your enemy. It was your system asking for leadership. And the moment leadership returned, the noise softened, not because life became easier, but because the one living it became grounded. You do not need silence outside. You need order within. And once order exists within you, nothing outside can take your peace.